Okay, welcome everyone that is joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Hosier, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Robert H. Jackson Center in Jamestown, New York. The Jackson Center envisions a world where the universal principles of justice, fairness, and equality prevail. We're excited to continue our symposium today, Nuremberg at 80, an International Reflection. A few housekeeping notes. You can turn on your captions at the bottom of the screen. Just click on the captions button. There will also be a Q&A portion at the end of our conversations, but you don't need to wait to put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat as you think of them. Go ahead and put them in there. Today's program is asking, what responsibility do artists, media figures, and creators bear when their images fuel atrocity? And what lessons can we carry forward as we commemorate the legacy of Nuremberg? Joining us today is military historian and legal scholar Dr. Mark Hull. Mark Hull is a professor at the Department of Military at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. He's also an advisor on Courtroom 600, who will be joining us as well today. And he's going to explore how propaganda in Nazi Germany was not only spoken or written, but also drawn, filmed, and mass distributed. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So we're going to get started in just 1 second. I made a promise that I wouldn't try to sing the Pembroke College fight song. But if you have any questions or anything, my email address is here, or you can get it. And I'd love to hear from anybody. So what I'm going to ask you to do today is we're going to look at images and of different sorts. I worked on this for quite some time, focusing on Nazi Germany, but I think in my mind, the application is more important now in 2026 than it was really almost at any time in the past. So when I had just started my dissertation in Germany, a great friend of mine, John Geringer, sent me this image that he took in Chicago airport. The imbecile on the left is wearing a T-shirt that says, FRHistS, behead the Lernian Hydra of Zionism. The Lernian Hydra was the second of Hercules' labors. It involved a serpent, and the problem with the serpent is that when Hercules attempted to decapitate it, it sprouted two heads from the stump where there was just one. So his solution to the problem was he would sever the head, and his nephew Iolaus would take fire and burn the stump, essentially to cauterize it. And that's the way that he killed the Hydra. And the more I thought about this, and especially since the lettering here is unmistakable, it's exactly the sort of almost Fraktur German script that you saw on a poster from a movie that came out in 1941 that we'll be talking about, FRHistS. But the image here in case the FRHistS reference, that of Jews, a serpent, death, and then destruction by fire, started to bother me in ways that I really hadn't anticipated. And this is not a long time ago, far, far away sort of story. This is right now. And things have only progressed in a worse direction since this photograph was taken a couple of years ago. So as we go through, I'd like you to focus on a couple different things. We're going to be talking about sort of image as narrative. And maybe the most important here is, what is the image or the message trying to get you to do? So to go beyond just the propaganda part, in other words, like trying to change minds or trying to condition people for certain things. What action is it trying to promote in the observer? So in this case, beheading, Jew, serpent, fire. And the guy who's wearing this shirt, I'm assuming, since he went to the trouble of actually buying it, and by the way, you can buy things like this in 1,000 different places, because I've looked in some of those places. What point is he trying to make? Let's think about that for a minute. Now, everybody gets really pleased when I go back to the early 16th century, so that's where we're going to go right now. In 1521, at the start of the Protestant Reformation, there is an artist named Lucas Cranach the Elder. He's best buddies with Martin Luther, and he's one of the people that help Luther shape the message that gets out about the Reformation. And he created a series of illustrations that were then printed using the relatively new technology of the printing press with movable type. And that technology is getting ready to change the world. The image here is on the left-hand side and is supposed to, by comparison, supposed to get you to do something. The images collectively, there are 12 sets of them. It's called, the Passions of the Christ and the Antichrist. On the left-hand side, you see Jesus chasing the moneylenders from the temple. And on the right side is peasants, normal people, who are bringing money and sitting it on a table in front of the Pope to pay for an indulgence. So what's it trying to get you to do? And the answer is, it's trying to get you to do the same thing that Jesus did in the story, which is to overturn the temple and essentially overturn the Pope and the Catholic Church. Not passively. What is your part in this? Because Cranach and Luther instinctively understood, again, maybe for the first time in history, the power of mass distribution and image. And the reason this works so well is because it appeals to people who can't read and write. You don't need to be literate to understand what's going on here, because you've seen the images of Christ and the money changers, and you know about indulgences. And in some ways, Cranach and Luther have the bookend of the problem that we have in 2026. So in 1521, it's essentially a pre-literate society. Most people simply cannot read and write, or at least they cannot read and write very well, if they can at all. And in 2026, we're in some ways in a post-literate society, which is increasing numbers of people do not get their information from reading, because, reading's hard, but rather information, everything is shared through a visual medium. Text, clips, and the attention span, of course, gets shorter and shorter, so you have to get more clever in terms of how punchy you want this message, but it's the same sort of idea. Can you use a visual image to convey or to get people to do a thing? And the answer, of course, is absolutely, you can do that. So by the time we get to the Nazis, going back to the foundation of the Nazi Party and then moving forward, the guy that understood that best in all its different aspects is Joseph Goebbels. And one of the things that he did as the Minister for Propaganda and Public Enlightenment is that he managed to bring the same philosophy across the entire range of distribution vehicles he had at his disposal. So he's doing this with posters. He's doing this with motion pictures. He's doing this with just casual illustrations. He's doing this, again, with his emphasis on the visual, as well as, of course, there is written text to go along with it. But he understands that the visual message is the most powerful. And especially if we couch these visual images that are driving toward action in such a way that the audience is going to be more receptive to them, that's all the better. So he says it specifically. And one of the things that when I was looking at sort of the Nuremberg and then the post-Nuremberg issues with incitement, of course, at the Nuremberg Trials, we have Julius Streicher, the guy on the right. Streicher is indicted on counts 1 and 4. The first is conspiracy, and that really is not going to go anywhere. but count 4 is crimes against humanity. And one of the specifications of that charge in the case of Streicher is incitement. So specifically, incitement leading to Holocaust. Now, I just had to show this picture because the idea, one of Streicher picking his nose is just too perfect to leave out. But the prosecutor here, who is exceptional at his job, Merwin Griffith Jones, he's a major. He's a phenomenal trial lawyer. Unfortunately, he went to Cambridge, but not Oxford. But his theory of the case here is that Streicher is using the same sort of tools. He's using images, he's using words, he's making speeches, and all of them are designed to create hatred in the German population or in maybe the larger German Reich. People to hate Jews and to think about them in a certain way. The weakness of the case is the tribunal, or at least the prosecution, thought that what they needed to show, if they could, was that Streicher's crime is worse because he did this with knowledge of the Holocaust. We don't really have time for a breakdown of the case, but that part was actually pretty weak. But the part that was incredibly strong is this parade of witnesses that talk about the way that Streicher ran his operation. And his operation was centered around this flagship publication, and there was also a publishing house connected with it. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Der Stürmer, it means the attacker. It's a weekly publication. It is published from the 1920s forward. Last issues are coming out in 1945. If you lived in Germany during the period of the Third Reich, you tripped over this stuff. You didn't have to be a subscriber to see it. And every one of these issues is anti-Semitic to its core. Because on the bottom of every issue of the first page is the slogan, "The Jews are our misfortune." Its only purpose is anti-Semitic hatred. So in this case, the headline is "The Jewish Murder Plan." And you have this cartoon or caricature, if you want to call it, whatever the thing is appropriate, about Jews killing, ritually sacrificing Christians, which is a recurrent theme. If you lived in a major town in Germany, you would have seen one of these open-air displays. Usually it's sometimes behind glass. The same thing, too. The latest issue of Der Stürmer is going to come out, and as you're walking by, you're going to notice, again, the headlines, but more specifically, your eyes are going to be drawn toward the caricatures that show Jews using every stereotypical trope and then creating some of their own. The guy who is not at Nuremberg and who does not appear at the subsequent Nuremberg trials is the artist that drew the caricatures. His name is Philipp Ruprecht. He went by the pen name Phipps. The picture on the left is Ruprecht wearing his lederhosen, and he, of course, has his little Nazi party pin on the strap in the middle. He did things like this. So in addition, of course, to bashing, the United States and the Soviet Union, the image at the top, a Jew wearing a fur coat with a stereotypical, physical features, and holding out his hat that says, "Give for poor Jews." This association with Jews and money is recurrent. But the physical image here, we're going to see this again and a lot more recently than the 1930s and 1940s. Streicher, and one of the reasons I think it was so easy to convict Streicher in 1946 was Streicher is just an odious human being. He has a monomaniacal hatred of Jews. He has certain perversions that come to the fore whenever in terms of the editorial policy of Der Stürmer. And one of the ones he has is this idea that Jews are having sexual relations with Aryan German women. So this is, and Phipps, Ruprecht is going to be the guy that puts this into visual form. So this thing here, the beginning and the end, and of course you get the Jew who's luring, the poor German, woman into the car, and then of course she becomes a prostitute. The same thing too. We poor Jews. There are tens of thousands of these images, and I'm not going to force you to sit through all of these. So in this case, it's a little pamphlet that comes out, and it's Jews introduce themselves with this sampling of different Jewish physical types, but again, reinforcing sort of the same stereotypes. So the butchers and rabbis and Jewish financiers, because of course the idea here is that they're all part of this global Jewish conspiracy to control the money supply of the world. And they're not, their logic isn't terribly consistent either, because Jews are both communists and capitalists, depending on what, where they want to show it. One of the things that Der Stürmer does in its publishing arm is put out a series of books, some of them intended for children. But the theme is exactly the same. Stereotypical Jewish features, so that once you saw one of these, the viewer doesn't need the words, sort of like the thing that Martin Luther was putting forward. And by the way, Martin Luther was just a rabid anti-Semite himself, which is why the Nazis recycle some of his words in the 1930s and 1940s. But you don't need the words to know what's being conveyed here. Same thing here. If there was no text on this, open air board of Der Stürmer, you're going to get the message just fine. This collaboration of Jews here on the left, and the blonde-haired Aryan kids that are reading the truth from Der Stürmer while the Jews conspire. And then of course you have below it here this related image of the three crows, and those are associated with the Jews. Laurie's going to pick up and run with the ball on this one, but I just wanted to mention, as part of this discussion with Ruprecht, who again is the artist, one of the most notorious books that comes out is Der Giftpilz, The Poison Mushroom. So it's written by a member of Stryker's editorial staff, Ernst Hiemer, and illustrated by Phipps. Jews are poison mushrooms. And we're going to start with that analogy and then build on it. Child molestation, right? Jew handing out candy to German school children. Jewish person, the same as before, corrupting the morals and values of German women and children. Jews scourging a naked Aryan woman who's been tied to kind of a sideways cross. Now, that's Ruprecht. Mm-hmm. We'll come back and find out what happens to him after the war here in a few minutes. But the second of this triad of people that I looked at, and the reason I picked these three guys is because in the history of the planet, there have only been 3 legal cases where people are prosecuted for incitement by image alone. And Ruprecht is one. The second guy here is Dr. Fritz Hippler. He's the second. Whereas Ruprecht is a visual artist, a caricaturist, Dr. Fritz Hippler is a motion picture director. He's not one of the good ones. Goebbels uses him for sort of low-level stuff, which needs to be competent, but he's never going to be one of the creative artists in the Third Reich in the film industry. Hitler has been who's a member of the Hitler Youth. By the time this picture is taken here, so Hitler in the middle, Dr. Goebbels here on his left, He's wearing the uniform of an SS major. He's got the service chevron, which indicates that he joined the SS before 1933. And if I had to examine this pretty closely, but the book are still images of photographs that Hitler took in Warsaw and in occupied Poland in 1939 in the ghetto. And everybody looks like they're having all kinds of fun just looking over this stuff. Hitler is most infamous, better word, for a film that he created that was based on or built from a traveling exhibition in the late 1930s called the Ewige Jude, the Eternal Jew. It toured, I think, 12 major German cities. And if you go in and you pay your money, you can see different exhibitions. It's essentially like a traveling museum, and you can see everything from casts of traditional Jewish faces, according to the Nazis. You can see degenerate art. You can see different displays in the ways that Jews have corrupted German society. And in this instance, a postal cancellation stamp, Munich, the main city of the movement, and Der Ewige Jude, the great political show. So even at the post office, we're promoting that you should go see this exhibition, which surprisingly did not seem to be all that well attended, but it's well financed. So what they hire Hitler to go do is to shoot a movie about this. And, we have this thing here that what you're going to see now is going to be based on historical facts. And I'm going to spare you like a long form explanation of what you're going to see here, but basically the movie is supposed to trace the roots of the Jewish problem in Europe. So it's this bacillus that begins in Asia and spreads, you can see in the center frame there, across Europe into Northern Africa and across the Atlantic and into the Americas. He manages with violating copyright to use images of Peter Laurie in the German film M. Hitler goes to the Łódź and Warsaw ghettos, and he takes pictures of Jews on the street. He uses his sort of Nazi credentials to watch some ritual Jewish ceremonies. But the crux of the film goes back to the thing that where we started. What does this want you to do? Is it just for information purposes, or is it some kind of a call to action? Well, the pivotal scene in the film, and again, it's just in terms of production values, it's kind of a bad movie. Forget the content. I mean, just the way it's cut and put together. But at the end, they show bags of grain, and they show rats, which they've already introduced to Jews as a parasite in a rat earlier in the film. They show rats teeming over the bags of grain and getting inside them. And the question that the narrator doesn't ask or answer is, what are you supposed to do with the rats that get in the grain? Because you don't have to ask and answer it. That's the whole point of the visual. What are you supposed to do now? And I think the answer is pretty obvious. And if that weren't sufficient, the film ends with a clip of Adolf Hitler and from a speech in January 1939. And he says, if international Jewish financiers in and outside of Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, the result will not be the de-Bolshevization of the earth, and thus the victory of Jewry, here's the key part, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. So at the time this film is made, there is already a world war. And Hitler has promised that if the world war comes, the Jewish race will be annihilated. and we've already just finished watching, Rats Eat the Grain. So what does Hitler want you to do about that? Come back to Hitler in the post-war here in just a moment. The last guy I looked at is, whereas Hitler is kind of a bottom feeder in terms of the film industry, we're going to go to the opposite extreme with a film director, Veit Harlan. Harlan is a named director. He's famous. He is a film artist. And in 1940, excuse me, he finishes a film that is released in 1941, and we've already encountered the topic of it, or encountered the film, FRHistS. It's based on a play. There was a British version of this movie released in 1934 that was actually, very sympathetic to Jews. Harlan's film is not going to be one of those. And so it purports to show the story of the Duke of Württemberg in the 18th century. And the Duke is running out of money, and his wife wants money, so the Duke goes to a moneylender, FRHistS. And you see him as, again, the stereotypical Jew that the Nazis have created. So in return for access and for power and position, FRHistS, the moneylender, gives money and jewels to the Duke of Württemberg. And he worms his way into the bureaucracy, and he eventually becomes even more powerful than the Duke. And he corrupts. But the important thing he does right away is before he gets to the kingdom, he changes his look. He goes from the Jewish moneylender with new clothes and a shave and a new haircut so that he can pass as an Aryan. He's shedding the Jewish identity and adopting one so that he can more easily worm his way into German society in Württemberg. And a lot of things go wrong. He accumulates wealth. He has one person killed for opposing him. He rapes a virtuous German woman played by Veit Harlan's wife, Christina Söderberg. And eventually there's a revolution. The people can't stand it anymore, and the Duke dies of a heart attack, and FRHistS is arrested, and he's put on trial and for stealing from the kingdom, but as well as, of course, the sexual assault on this German girl, which is really sort of the crux of the matter. He's convicted, and as the trial happens at the end of the film, he's resumed his previous incarnation of being the Jewish moneylender. They put him in a gibbet and hang him. That's the cage part, which was, a thing. And the magistrate at the end says that from this point, Jews shall leave the kingdom of Württemberg and never return. And we enjoin our descendants, our children and their children and their children to keep this oath that Jews will never be among us. Now, this one's a little harder. So if the Ruprecht stuff is pretty obvious and the Hitler stuff is pretty obvious, the question is then, what does Harlan, who is he's taken an existing screenplay but is rewriting it, what's his point in this movie? What is he trying to get you to do? Not what is he trying to get you to think necessarily, but what is he trying to get you to do? And I think this one is a little harder, but it sort of comes to the same point. And there's another factor to consider here too, both with the Hitler film, but more importantly with FRHistS, which is the psychological effects of watching this kind of hatred in the confines of a dark theater where your eyes are glued to the images on the screen. And because this is Nazi Germany, one of the options you don't have is to throw your popcorn down and walk out. So there is this pressure of conformity, but it plays on tropes and stereotypes that the Nazis have been using, for 20 years now. So this is Harlan and Ferdinand Marian, who's the actor who plays Yud Sus, and apparently playing that role really destroyed Marian. Joseph Goebbels, Fritz Hippler in the middle, and Veit Harlan giving his little Nazi salute. And this is the premiere of Yud Sus. So you have the guy who's leaning forward here is Ferdinand Marian, who plays Yud Sus, Veit Harlan, Joseph Goebbels, and Fritz Hippler up on the balcony. Now, when the war ended, and Streicher goes on trial at Nuremberg and is convicted for incitement and hanged. As part of the post-war occupation, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union have denazification policies to rid Germany of any taint of Nazism. The Americans initially were very enthusiastic, but after they realized how many people they would have to deal with, which was about 30 million, America got out of the denazification business as fast as humanly possible and turned the process over to Germans. You went before a Spruchkammer. You filled out a questionnaire, and you were rated on one of 5 levels of complicity with the Nazis. So if you're level 1, you need to be at Nuremberg or one of the post-Nuremberg proceedings. If you're level 5, you have no connection. Level 4 is a follower, but you're not really that enthusiastic about it. You may have joined a Nazi umbrella organization. And then 2 and 3 are somewhere in the middle. So the requirement was for all adults, male and female, to complete the questionnaire, to have it evaluated. But all of the questionnaires had to be run through the Berlin Document Center. And then they did come up with a few others, but it simply overwhelmed the system to try to process and determine whether or not people had lied on the questionnaire or their degree of culpability or responsibility for the Nazi state or the Holocaust. What happened in order of the people that we've talked about so far this morning, Ruprecht, the prosecutor that was assigned his case, hated him, thought he was an absolute Nazi, thought he was an agent of the Holocaust, and the prosecutor just nailed him. Ruprecht ended up getting 5 years at hard labor. The problem, though, with any of these sort of post-war Spruchkammern was that depending on when you went before one is going to determine what kind of a sentence you're going to get. So if you went before it early, before 1949, you had a chance of getting a pretty decent sentence. If you went to the Spruchkammer after, in say 48 or 49, your chances of walking out free are very high, because we're shifting priorities pretty quickly to the Cold War. And since Germany came back as a state in 1949, and there's an implicit agreement to end denazification, people who were absolutely guilty escape prosecution entirely. Ruprecht gets 5 years. He develops he says, a very painful skin condition, and somewhere along the way, so he doesn't serve his 5, he serves about 2. He'd been barred from profession. He'd been fined. He was very upset about that. His wife was very upset about that. But after a couple of years, he's able to resume basically his old life. Hitler, his prosecutor, named Freiherr von Munchausen, also loathes Hitler and everything he stands for. Hitler manages to escape doing time or going to an allied tribunal simply because he keeps jumping jurisdictions, and they're really never able to quite get their hands on him, and he just runs out the clock. So Hitler never has any after effects from the denazification program. Veit Harlan has many influential friends. He has money. He goes through 2 trials in Hamburg. The first trial, he's acquitted. The British, it's because it's British zone of occupation. The British insist on an appeal and a second trial before the same trial judge, who is a former Nazi and whose wife had worked as a doctor in the euthanasia program. He's acquitted for a second time. Part of the reason is the prosecution theory was dumb and bad because they thought that they could prove a nexus between Harlan's film and the extermination program. And if that was their intention, they just did it in a very, very sloppy way, and they just didn't present the witnesses that any witnesses that really could have established that. So Harlan, eventually, he goes free. He resumes his career as a director. He makes a couple more bad movies, also with his wife, Christina Soderbaum, and just kind of drifts off to insignificance. But those 3 people are sort of the driving forces, along with others that we don't really have time to talk about, of not only inciting hatred to the Jews, but I think my argument here is they're trying to incite action. But of course, because this is, what happens, everybody that you nail for their part in this just points at somebody else and say, hey, Ruprecht says, it wasn't my fault. I didn't mean to do it. I wasn't anti-Semitic. I have Jewish friends, he says. Didn't produce any, but he said he had some. But I only did this because Stryker told me to. And Stryker would point at somebody else. And Hitler, I only did this because the propaganda minister told me I had to do it. And Harlan is, I only did it because the propaganda minister said I had to do it. Harlan could have said no because he is a star director. But he didn't say no. But in the end, because again, they sort of waited it out, none of them received the justice that they had richly deserved. So I'm going to turn this over to Laurie now, because again, my argument here is that in sort of the bookend to the issues that Martin Luther and Cranach had, we're living in a world that the Nazis created for us. And I know that may sound extreme, but I think it's accurate. Because again, Goebbels used every means at his disposal to get out the messages that the Nazis wanted to promote. Goebbels could not have imagined in his wildest dream that I can sit at a computer and I can use an engagement algorithm and I can send out the most hideous, vile things that on earth with a click of a button. And it's going to go to millions or billions of people. And there's no end to it. Like there's no end to the amount of that I can turn out without any repercussions, at least in the United States. Some other countries have this figured out better than we do. But right now, we are drowning in a sea of incitement. And I know Laurie's going to pick this up and take it in for the touchdown. Laurie, time for the touchdown.
Thank you, Mark. Touchdown, I hope it shall be. First of all, I want to thank the Robert H. Jackson Center for this opportunity to share our work today. As part of Nuremberg's 80th, my relationship to Nuremberg is actually personal, and I'm going to tell you a little story about how it happened. Just a little over 10 years ago, when I lost my father, I inherited a trove of World War II memorabilia from his service in the U.S. Army and at working at Nuremberg. And he had never told any of us about this. Even my mother had not seen these things. And so as I was pulling things out of the bag, I was struck because his Army discharge papers, which is where I started, called him a clerk typist. And then I came to this restricted authorization badge that calls him counterintelligence and don't ask him any questions. And it's hand signed by the prison commandant, Burton Andrus, who I would learn about. But then I got to these items and he's no longer wearing his Army uniform. And if he's a clerk typist, where's the typewriter? So all these things just deepened the mystery, and history hit me in the gut with every artifact that I pulled out of the bag. What's he doing in the war criminals wing? And then there's this tranche of Army diaries also, which precede Nuremberg, and they're actually from a secret interrogation camp the Allies opened before the war even ended, codenamed Ashcan. And as you can see on the opening date here, it's May 6th. This is a log of all the prisoners and the dates that they arrived there. This is the Palace Hotel in Luxembourg, where this interrogation camp was placed. It was a spa resort destination, and the U.S. Army took it over because it was very remote, and they wanted to keep it that way. And they called my father's anti-aircraft battalion, the 391st, to guard it. They stripped out all the luxury mattresses and chandeliers and glass panes and put a ring of electrified fence around it. And somehow my dad was plucked from the guard pool into the commandant's office, and I believe he typed a lot of these papers that he brought home with him. And I started learning about Nuremberg from ground zero. I knew nothing. So as I became acquainted with the class of 45, which is this picture of major war criminals and other high-ranking Nazi leaders in front of the Palace Hotel, I was completely intrigued that my father was that close to history and never said anything. Just a smattering of some of the documents that I have, letters that everyone wrote, not only to their family members, but this on the left, Goering wrote to General Eisenhower shortly after he was admitted, and he's asking if he can please fly to be with his wife and daughter for a few days. And on the right, from Wilhelm Keitel from the Armed Forces. The letter beneath is shortly after he got into the camp, but the one on the front, which I've highlighted, they flew to Nuremberg on August 12th. So they were there from May through August. But as he landed in the Nuremberg prison, he's talking about the fact that he's served his country for 44 years without a blemish, and he really doesn't understand the treatment he's receiving. And I was pretty blown away by that because they are all thinking they are doing good things. And this is probably one of the most profound memos of the collection for me. They showed atrocity films to the big house, as Ashcan was called, in July. And this memo from Andrus is talking about the reaction from the individuals, and one high-ranking attorney claimed that what they were seeing in these concentration camps were the result of Allied bombings. That was Karl Dönitz, by the way, and I have letters from him as well. Pretty astounding. So all these things that my dad saved and hid for so many years up in our attic were like breadcrumbs and puzzle pieces to a secret story that I just had to get to the bottom of. And soon I started to envision a behind-the-scenes story of Nuremberg from a very different perspective. You see, I'm a producer and a creative director and a storyteller. And so I wanted to know the experience of boots on the ground, what it was like to actually work there. A place that was so ruined that you couldn't even drink the water without putting a chlorine tablet in it. And as you walked around the town, the stench of 20,000 people still buried under the rubble, dead for months and months, was what you encountered every day. Courtroom 600 is the name of the project, named after the room where the trials occurred. And the first thing that I did was, and actually at the request of the Teachers College of Arizona State University, they wanted a photo gallery with captions for photo analysis learning. And I had already been making my way around the archives, searching for my father, but also gathering primary sources in the photography to support the story that I wanted to see. So in 3 galleries, the henchmen are all profiled, the making of. Most of these images have never been seen online before. And I met Mark, and he shortly afterwards started to use them in his war crimes classes at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. So from there, I realized that youth education was going to become an imperative. Charlottesville happened, and I had the really good fortune of meeting a retiring history teacher in Chicago who had been using the Nuremberg Trials to teach the war for over 35 years, and in particular, developing a Nuremberg simulation. So he knew where all the sources were that were going to be engaging for youth. And bottom line is that to take this complex story of Nuremberg to a place where younger and general audiences can access it and find it fascinating, and also engage with the story from the point of view that they want to come at it from, their own interests. My interests were film and photography and journalism and the art history, but Holocaust and the law is another area, and military history, of course. This is my vision for a virtual museum, focused on the human experience and at the intersection of storytelling, scholarship, and interactive design. But here's the youth education that we're working on now, which is so critical. Using the 4 charges at Nuremberg as a scaffolding to teach the causes and consequences of the war in Europe more efficiently and more accurately. For the students, 10-minute podcasts start the lessons off, and then companion photo galleries that back up all of those concepts in that story. And then they go and analyze primary sources. For teachers, 3 model lesson plans that reach down all the way to grade 7. And depending on the level of student and their, what they're capable of, they can either analyze the indictment or watch a cartoon. And training podcasts, because many teachers don't have the background in Nazi ideology. That's where we're starting from. And a suite of resources. And by the way, Mark has reviewed all of these things for accuracy, which is so important. There's a robust glossary and bibliography. So we have one module done. The cause of war was the conspiracy. And just to give you a flavor of what the lesson is like, the podcast takes the point of view of a young person growing up in Germany in the 20s and 30s, the Aryan Germans. And what would they see in their lifetime? How would their curriculum change? How would all the militarization and the focus on that and Hitler's removal of all of his political opponents, and Jews, of course. So the photos support all of those concepts. And the podcast was written directly from this primary source, an affidavit from an American school teacher in Berlin from 1928 to 39. And this affidavit basically lays out everything that happened. He got into the classrooms, he saw for himself. So this is the way that we're approaching education, and the focus is on perpetrators and the consequences. And in that way, we are a different approach to confronting hate, anti-Semitism, and extremism. And here's why. We tell kids that Hitler did not do good things for Germany. This is what Hitler did. And there's so much historical distortion out there right now. Churchill started the war. Hitler was a good guy. His speeches are all on TikTok, and kids are listening to them. We are asking them to think about the choices they're making right now and where they are taking them. Because if you could be like this boy, either captured or dead, like more than 50% of your friends. So that is our approach. And in one class period with homework, and these are flexible resources that can fit into existing curriculum. Module 1 will teach that Nazi ideology was the cause of war in Europe. Anti-Semitism was an integral part of the ideology, and the Holocaust was an integral part of the war. So we are pulling the Holocaust into the center of World War II education where it belongs, not as a separate chapter in turning the book that comes after the war. And in that way, we complement traditional Holocaust intolerance education and strengthen it, actually. So who are we targeting? Well, we know that kids are on their phones all the time. And this is kind of a realistic statistic, 8 hours a day. And what are they looking at? Well, first of all, there's a mental health crisis with kids. They're online searching for community, and they're in gaming communities. They're in social media. And all they need to do is be in a mood and hit like on something like Hitler was right, or From the River to the Sea. And extremist recruiters begin to send them messages and target them. And it starts out with the opportunity for friendship and belonging. And sooner and later, it gets into the ideology. And then we have a problem. And this is really what we want to do with our curriculum. We want to prevent today's youth from becoming tomorrow's perpetrators. That's the goal of Courtroom 600. And so Pepe the Frog, who's been co-opted by both the far right and the far left, is just a gateway. Here are some memes now. Let's take a look at what is evading content moderation tools. There's Pepe the Frog again, created on the left side to be a knight or a crusade, if you will. AI is allowing them to do much more sophisticated looking graphics. Coded language is another area. Juice for Jews. And then take a look at this. Now we've got the combination of a Viking with a juice box. And it looks innocent unless you know what the coded language means. Nicki Minaj reading the Talmud, a symbol of manipulation. Pop culture, the intersection of that is a really big part. Repetition of these characters in seemingly innocent situations. But here we've got him taking a selfie with Anne Frank on a roller coaster outside a concentration camp. And then once they see the frog enough, they start to bring in the ideology and the hate. More AI generated materials from the Happy Merchant. Evading content moderation tools. And this one in particular, innocence and incitement in one same image that looks like a realistic Disney film. On 4chan, which was quite a cruise for a first timer, they are giving instructions on how to create memes to evade detection. And in the lower right, you can see what the result is. The intersection of pop culture is a gateway for sure. And you can see here, Taylor Swift is not wearing a Nazi uniform per se, the Iron Cross, but you get the idea. So that's where we are with the state of things. And I know there's not much more time for questions, but if anyone would like to ask them, we would welcome the opportunity to do so now. Put them in the chat. If you'd like the source of the video, please contact me at our website at courtroom600.org, and I can send the sources to these videos. I certainly would not send you to BitChute or Rumble, because if you are playing videos in those platforms, they are generating ad revenue, and I would certainly deny them of that.
Laurie, we have a question and Mark, we have a question on the Nuremberg movie. Your thoughts? One of our audience members had some struggles with it because they felt it avoided a lot of the key takeaways. So have you seen the movie, and what are your thoughts?
I have. How much time do we have left? Because I could go on this rant for quite some time.
Technically about 2 minutes,
Okay.
but perhaps we will allow people to stay on a little bit longer if there are some additional questions.
I thought that you even accidentally had as many factual, legal, historical, and even uniform errors in one film was just extraordinary. I just and I know I'm one of these people I can't watch like a legal movie with somebody else and with them having a good time. It was so bad. It was just bad. I'm glad. I love the fact that Nuremberg is it hit the mainstream in terms of a movie called Nuremberg, but I thought the fidelity to the facts and accuracy was extraordinarily poor.
Laurie, any additional thoughts?
Sure. Well, this is the first time that I've actually seen a film where I could sit there and go, no, no. But I watched it twice. I watched it with a classroom of 35 students and teachers and spoke to them afterwards to get their immediate takeaways. And I can tell you that I was pleased, quite honestly. Many or most had never seen concentration camp footage before. And so that was really impactful for them. And secondly, Doug Kelly's point of view that good people can do bad things. It doesn't really just need to be the monsters, ordinary people. They got that. And that's what we want students to see from our curriculum also. From the Wilhelm Keitel letter, good people do very bad things, all the while thinking they were doing good.
We at the Jackson Center are also using it as a teaching moment. We actually just had a program a week ago with Jack L. Hyde, the author of the book that the movie is based on, and talked through sort of the translation of history and books into movie and dramatic license and those things, and how we at least are hoping that people use this if this is their first exposure to Nuremberg as a path to learn more, because there is so much more and so much deeper to get into that. See, I'm not seeing. Oh, has any jurisdiction had success combating or mitigating damaging online content?
Yes. So as opposed to the United States, for example, in Germany, it is a criminal offense to glorify or use symbology from the Nazi regime. People have been convicted and gone to prison. The U.S. is sort of the Wild West, and I think given the restrictions of Section 238 of the Communications Decency Act, we don't have the ability to hold platformers, content providers liable for the most outrageous and hateful and inciting things that you can imagine. And I think that is going to have to change because every day we're just getting further and further behind, and the law just simply can't catch up.
We have a question of, does the use of evidentiary footage shown at the Nuremberg trials documenting the liberation of the concentration camps function as an effective counter to modern Nazi propaganda?
Laurie, you're on.
Oh, that's for me. We feel that Nuremberg has a new job to do. Of course, the films, the photos, and all the evidence, we need to punch back against historical distortion and denial, anti-Semitism, hate, and all forms of racism. And Nuremberg's truth we feel it can do that. We've seen it in classrooms with a variety of settings. Brown and Black urban students and white and Asian and Jewish suburban students. So yes, but they have to be put into the right context. And we're teaching World War II in required social studies classes in a way that addresses state mandated standards. And I don't know how many teachers there are out there, but there's limited numbers of minutes to cover things and a big, huge checklist. And so what we're trying to do is condense this and bring the materials in a way that students can come to their own conclusions.
I'm going to do one final wrap-up question. Since it has become almost impossible to bifurcate the propaganda from the reality, and we are getting a lot of misinformation and propaganda, what can be done to handle all of this confusion? What recommendations do you have?
I think I would go back to the idea that there are tools that we could have, but for whatever reason, we've chosen not to have. And this idea, and I know there are First Amendment free speech considerations, but it's the nature and proliferation and attention economy of social media it's so much worse than it was. And when Laurie and I were talking last night about this, I think the thing that sticks with me is that my grandfather and her father and the grandfathers and grandmothers of millions of people. At the end of the Nuremberg trials, they had every reason to believe that we had vanquished this evil forever. And instead, we've let them down. We've allowed it to grow again and to grow worse again. And the responsibility of that is ours. And I think the fact that you have to go to the source, you have to cut off the distribution channels, and you have to have the education piece that Laurie is shepherding. We have to inoculate our kids against hateful, violent, societally destroying things, as well as fighting directly and with all the means we have to stop people from introducing this poison again. We thought we defeated it before, and we were wrong. And it's time for Nuremberg to do some heavy lifting now.
Laurie, any final words?
Thank you for putting the link to the teacher resources in the chat. They are available in one zipped download. All the lesson plans and resources, and the podcast and the photo gallery are on that page as well, freely accessible. Are resources being used across the country? Yes, we are just rolling them out, and we've been to 4 states. And we have some reports if anyone wants to see what types of student reactions and teacher responses that we're getting. But we're starting to roll them out a lot more in Chicago too.
Well, thank you both for this informative and, to be honest, quite frightening presentation that you have made today. For all of those in our audience, please tune in to the next program in this series, which will be in March. We do one of these a month. And if you go to roberthjackson.org, you can see the full schedule there. So Laurie and Mark, thank you very much for your time today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in.
Thank you.